And welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a story about money, about history, and about justice. It's really a tale of two massive debts paid for two historical crimes. But, as you're about to see, the way these debts got settled tells us something really profound about the imbalances in our world.
And really, it all boils down to this one big question, right? When a huge injustice happens, who's on the hook to make things right? Who gets the compensation, and who's asked to foot the bill? The answers, well, they're rarely simple, and they tell you a whole lot about who holds the power.
Let's start with a number, a big one, 20 million pounds. Back in 1833, this was an almost unimaginable amount of money. I mean, a fortune so huge it would literally change the UK's finances for generations to come. So who is all this money for?
Well, this massive government bailout, it wasn't for the victims of slavery. Nope, it was compensation paid directly to the slave owners themselves for the loss of what the law considered their property. And this one transaction, it's right at the heart of our first story.
All right, so let's really dig into this first case. The debt paid to the architects of slavery, not its victims, all stemming from the British Slavery Abolition Act. You know, it's really important to get that abolition wasn't just a switch being flipped. It was a long, drawn-out process. As you can see here, the slave trade, the buying and selling of people, was banned way back in 1807. But the act to actually abolish slavery itself didn't pass until 1833. And even then, full freedom didn't come until 1838, after this period of forced unpaid apprenticeship.
And the sheer scale of this payment is it's hard to wrap your head around. This chart shows it all. That 20 million pounds was a staggering 40% of the UK's entire national budget for 1833. 40%. To even fund it, the government had to take out one of the biggest loans in its history.
And just to put that into perspective for us today, that 20 million pounds is the equivalent of about $17 billion in today's money. Think about that. A massive transfer of public wealth. Not to fix the damage done by slavery, but to pay off the very people who had profited from it.
And get this might be the most shocking part of the whole story. That loan, taken out in 1833 to pay the slave owners, was so enormous that British taxpayers, you, me, our parents, were still paying it off until 2015. Yeah, for 182 years, generations of people were unknowingly covering the cost of compensating enslavers. And the core injustice here, the real kicker, after centuries of the most brutal exploitation, the 800,000 men, women, and children who were finally freed, they got nothing. No land, no money, no support to start a new life. Absolutely nothing. Okay, so now let's pivot. Let's turn to a completely different picture. Over a century later, after another horrific crime against humanity, a totally different precedent for justice was set. We're talking about Germany's approach to Holocaust reparations. You see, after World War II, Germany's reparations were specifically designed to go straight to the victims and their communities. Money went to the State of Israel to help resettle survivors. It went to organizations like the Claims Conference to distribute aid directly. And, crucially, it went to individual survivors themselves in the form of pensions and other support. And here's a crucial difference. This wasn't a one-and-done payment. It all started with the Luxembourg Agreement back in 1952, but it has continued as an ongoing living commitment. Every single year, the German government and the Claims Conference negotiate new funding to make sure survivors are taken care of.
The whole spirit of this commitment is not just financial, it's moral. The principle is crystal clear. As long as a single survivor is alive, the responsibility to provide support is still there.
So let's just put these two stories side by side for a second. On one hand, you've got a massive payment to perpetrators for their loss of property, with the actual victims getting zero. On the other hand, you have ongoing payments to survivors for their human suffering, framed as a permanent moral duty. The contrast is just, wow, it's stark. And it begs the question, why?
Well, the answer seems to lie in a concept that explains so much about how our world works. It's called the asymmetry of power. And it's this idea that power, whether it's economic, political, or cultural, is not spread out equally, not even close. So what does that mean? Basically, the people or nations who already have the power, the money, the military, the influence, they're the ones who get to design the rules of the game. And surprise, surprise, they tend to make rules that help them keep that advantage. It creates this feedback loop where power and influence just keep feeding on themselves. And that's exactly why this imbalance is so hard to shake. The incredible wealth that was extracted during periods like colonialism and slavery, it gave some nations a huge head start while creating lasting disadvantages for others. These powerful nations also get to control the global narrative. They decide which histories get told in school and which injustices are treated as urgent crises. Moral urgency, as we've just seen, often gets applied very selectively.
Okay, so if the system is so tilted, what's the path forward? Is there a way to rebalance the scales? Well, thinkers and leaders across the Global South have been proposing strategies for a long time, all focused on building self-determination and forging a new way.
Now, the goal here isn't to be isolated, it's to be self-determined, and that takes a lot of work on many fronts. First off, building up economic independence, so you're not so reliant on former colonial powers. Second, investing in your own local knowledge and innovation to create growth that lasts. This is all backed up by renewing solidarity with other nations in the Global South, creating powerful new alliances. And this is huge, pursuing cultural decolonization, taking back your own history, your own story. Of course, you have to ensure accountability at home to build strong institutions. And when you do all that, it strengthens the final step, making moral and reparative claims from a position of strength and agency, not just as a victim.
And all of this brings us to one last really critical idea that ties everything together. Some people call it the politics of perception.
What this means is that real power isn't just about having the biggest army or the most money. It's about controlling the story. The ability to shape how history is remembered, whose pain is seen as legitimate, and which crimes actually demand justice, well, that might be the most powerful form of power there is.
And so, that leaves us with a final question to think about. As we look at the world, as we read the news, as we look at our own history books, we have to ask ourselves, whose story is being centered here? Whose suffering is being valued? And maybe most importantly, who gets to decide?